Gnosis. Okay, let's begin. So we're talking about the Esoteric Path. Yeah? So tonight, this is our last sort of lecture in this cycle. We do have, the next lecture is about meditation, but we're going to do that on Wednesday night as an introduction to Meditation Chamber. Hello, Rowan, our newest member, just turned 7, so now he's allowed to come to class. He's entering his mercurial period. There we go. Okay, so initiation. Initiation is something that's been talked about in lots of things. You know, you have the initiation talked about like in the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Theosophists, various religions and cults talk about initiation. And it's something that is mostly misunderstood. Not really understood, yeah? So let's talk about it. So initiation. If you want initiation, write it on a staff, yeah? Initiation is the life itself lived with rectitude and purpose. So in our world now, you know, we sort of lost our way a little bit in regards to esoteric knowledge. Yeah, the esoteric knowledge, esoteric means hidden knowledge, yeah, or for an elect, for people who have been chosen, not by another people, but who've been chosen by God, what they call donum Dei. And so you have what's called exoteric religion. I'll write that here, exoteric, EXO, and then esoteric. And exoteric is a teaching that is for just the common people, yeah? Which means it's usually a moral teaching, exoteric. And exoteric is a moral teaching usually based around good karma. Whether it's Christian or not, it's still based upon the ethics of good karma, meaning that I am, you know, and the most common one is, what does it do? Do unto others as you will have them do unto you. Do you know what I mean? And that's in every single religion. Every single religion has its own version of do unto others, you know? And this is exoteric religion. Is basically just a set of moral rules and codes used to live a better life and for us to have at least some relationship with God, some reverence for God, some feeling for the being inside of us, yeah? Now, esoteric is something a little more deep than that. The esoteric knowledge at the heart of every school is something more. It is an elect knowledge. It is the knowledge that really sets one free. This knowledge just helps one to live a good life, but the esoteric knowledge is one that sets you free. Yeah, in the Buddhist tradition, the esoteric knowledge was the one that set you free from the wheel of samsara, took you away from the constant reincarnations. Yeah. In the esoteric Christianity, or well, honestly, Gnosticism, it was one that liberated you from the shackles of the world, from the illusion of the world. Yeah, the illusion, what the Buddhists call Maya and the Hindus call Maya, the illusion of reality, as opposed to the same concept that the Gnostics have. I think a lot of people say that old Gnostics thought the world was evil, that matter was evil, and a better translation is that it's illusory. Yeah. Its evil is that it captures you with its desire in its duality. But that's not really the whole point of the class. I just want to talk about esoteric knowledge. So when we're talking about the esoteric path, we're talking about a hidden path, a mysterious path. And we're talking about an internal path, yeah? An internal path, although it has there are physical aspects to it. The alchemy, for instance, is practiced physically. The psychological death and meditation there are physical aspects to that. Working in sacrifice has some physical aspects. At the same time, it is individual to the person. For a long time, for instance, you had in schools like Freemasonry, they have initiation. You're initiated into the Freemason sect. They still have it. If you look up online, the Freemasons, you know, you get initiated into the Freemasons, and they kind of, you know, you go in, you have a beer down in the bar, and then they do the whole initiation ceremony, and it's sort of sacred, but it's sort of lost it's lost a lot of what made it great. But originally, the very early Masons, which come through the whole process, you know, their knowledge originally coming through the alchemists and then through the Templars, etc. Yeah, that initiatic philosophy originally was an exterior acknowledgement of an internal reality. Meaning a person was given, say, for instance, the 5th degree or 6th degree when they reached the 5th or 6th degree internally. And then it was celebrated externally in the lodge, and they would do the initiation. You understand what I mean? They would do it outside once the person reached it inside. And some of these sects were so powerful esoterically, had such deep internal knowledge, that they could put the person through that physical act, and they would also go through it internally. But that was lost a long time ago. Yeah. Now, when you go to these places, if you meet a 33rd degree Mason, it means nothing. Yeah. That's what I mean. So there are no, in Gnosis, there are no physical initiations. When I'm talking about an initiatic path, yeah, initiatic means to begin, to be brought into a secret knowledge, etc. That doesn't exist physically. It's internal. So the initiations I'm going to talk about are something that exists within your own self, within your own person. But by the same rote, the path is something real and serious, meaning that it's not this concept that everyone has of the journey. You know, the journey is a real sort of way of talking that people have. They say, oh, everyone's on a journey, and they'll intersperse this with path. They'll say, everyone's on their own path, everyone's on their own journey. Yeah. In Gnosticism, we're not saying that every single thing that happens to you is part of the Esoteric Path. That's not true. The Esoteric Path is something very specific. When I say it's written upon a staff, that represents our internal spine, which I'm going to go into as we get there. And that's actually the spine really of the vital, astral, mental. It's more than just the physical spine. But so when we're talking here about this, we're talking about something real and very serious, not just hey man, you know, chill out, you're all on the journey. Don't worry, everything you do is part of the path. That's just not true. Yeah? Everything is part of your karmic reality, if you understand what I mean. And yes, we should learn to chill out, of course, but it's not the path. Yeah, that's a different thing. So what I'm talking about is something, I'm not trying to destroy the concept that everyone's on a sort of a journey somewhere. That's true. Karmic destiny is a very normal thing. Everyone, it's written into your hands. That's why palmistry works. Because at your birth, your mechanical karma or karmic destiny is written into your hands, yeah? And it will control it. And that's what will happen. You know, we may go to see this person and go, we'll move along that pathway of that karmic destiny. But karma is different to an internal or external test, yeah? Where people are actually tested by the other masters of the White Lodge, where people are tested internally, tested in the astral, even physical situations, testing a person is different to karma, yeah? And I'll get into that a little bit later because we need to talk about what a test really is as we go through some tests, you know, and then we'll explain. But as I said, just having a trying situation in your life doesn't make it part of the esoteric path, you know? I know many, many people who've just lived horrible, horrible lives and they're not anywhere esoterically. They may have gained some knowledge, but at the same time, you don't necessarily gain knowledge. Like, have you ever seen the guy living, you know, you see these homeless guys living in the park and they live some of those horrible situations you can imagine. Have they changed? No. Have they learnt anything? Maybe the essence has learnt something inside of itself, and maybe in the next lifetime it won't want to go into such an extreme state of degeneration. Perhaps. Perhaps not. Yeah? We don't know. So what we're talking about here is something real and serious with a many, many defined stages and steps. And although each person will walk that path in a slightly different way, there still are very obvious signposts to this esoteric path. Yeah, and part of it is possible to have done before reaching Gnosis, that's true. But at the same time, there are very, very obvious road markers that very few people would have done in their lives outside of a true esoteric teaching. One has to find the knowledge and then apply it, rather than just try and look at esoteric things and then try to apply them to my life and say, oh, I probably went through that when I was 13. That's just not how this works. Okay, so the esoteric path is composed of 4 main parts. Yeah, what's called the probationary path, which is about separating oneself from life. It is to renounce the world and begin to take up an internal path. This is the part that I said that many people may have done before. It's possible to do this completely unconsciously, in a way, yeah. But at the same time, this is all about getting one's sort of defining one's life for an esoteric process and to walk the greater path. It finishes with the awakening of the Kundalini fire. That's the end, beginning with the grounding and threshold, which we'll talk about in a minute. The next part of the path is what we call the 3 mountains. The first mountain is the mountain of initiation. This is where, we've talked about this quite a lot, the bodies are created. This is where the bodies, remember we talked about becoming the soul of man, and about incarnating the human soul, about creating the astral body, the mental body, vital body, etc. This is what happened. This is where this happens. This is where all the powers are created. Yeah, where a person, the being confers upon the person all of the various powers that are going to be necessary for their esoteric path. The next part of the path is the second mountain, which is called the mountain of death. The second mountain, also called the great work, and this has to do with dissolving all of the ego, 100%. With the help of our own interior being. Our being helping us to dissolve all of the ego and finish with all of the ego. And then the last part of the esoteric path, the third mountain, which doesn't have a special name like the major mysteries or great work. The third mountain, the last part, is the ascension, which is about incarnating the last primary forces. If you look at the Kabbalah, the last three circles there, the three original parts of the being, up here, like that, Kether, Chokmah, Binah. And also going back to the absolute. So this path starts here, as we are, a slightly mechanical, suffering little person that we are, etc. One spinning around the wheel of samsara over and over again, and ends going back to the absolute. Doesn't end in heaven. Yeah, that's exoteric. Yeah, an exoteric thing is where I start here, I do lots of good stuff, and then I get to go to heaven. I'm going to talk about that. That is actually that is a valid path, but it's not the path that leads to the final liberation. It's not the path that leads to the absolute. The absolute is not heaven. The absolute is uncreated light. It's unmanifested. It's well beyond that. Yeah. Okay. So let's begin. The probationary path. How does one enter onto the probationary path? Okay, so the probationary path begins with an internal test known as the guardian of the threshold. The guardian of the threshold is where a person must confront themselves. This was done in ancient times. If a person wanted to enter into the mysteries, because now we live, everything's internal, but during Atlantis, much of this was physical. A person would actually knock on the temple door, knock, 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 and then they would actually have to physically confront the guardian of the temple, and he would attack you with a sword. And if you lived, you could go to the next test. Yeah, that was how it was done back in the day. Now, this test is one that's done very specifically, 9 times out of 10 in the astral. Although it is possible to do it physically. Some old sects used to use a mirror and some very specific work to try and bring this apparition out. But if we're serious, this will happen to us anyway. And so the guardian of the threshold is where we must take the first confrontation of the ego. The first. Yeah? And this means a separation from the idea of seeing all the situations of my life as being just what they are. You know, just situations of life that just make me. You know what I mean? Have you ever seen, what's that? It's like the eat, pray, love thing. All I've got is these choices I make. You know, have you ever heard them say that? It's like on the trailer. He goes, "What are you, man? I'm just these choices I make." That's just so unbelievably shallow. It's just the normal person. Their life lives on rails. Do you guys remember Pokemon Snap? Or am I like the only person who played Nintendo 64 in the room? I remember Pokemon Snap. It was like this game, and literally you're just like on a train, and you can only move around like that, and you just take photos of Pokemon as they walk past. That was it. That was the whole game. It's unbelievably boring, and yet many people really enjoyed it. That's what life is for most people. They're just kind of like on this train, on the rails of their life, you know, and there's their baby down there, there's a bit of a big bump, there's a divorce over there. But down here, it's mostly fine. There's a few kids a bit bumpy in that part, you know what I mean? Oh, he's sort of looking around, taking photos. That's a normal person's life, yeah? They're not pushing against the current. They're not fighting with themselves. They're not questioning their reality. Most people very rarely question their reality. You ever try to question a person's reality? It's not a fun thing to do. You know, like my dad used to do it at the shops sometimes. You know? We'd just be there like doing the checkout, you know what I mean? And, you know, how was your day? You go, oh, don't know. It was a pretty... Sometimes I don't even remember. He goes, what year is it? And the lady would just look at him like, Like, don't do this to me. Don't make me try and think about space and time at the checkout, you horrible, horrible misogynist. And I remember one of my favorites is my my father had he had a, you know how like everyone has a name tag when you go into Woolies and that? You got a name tag. And my father went and had a name tag made up that said Sean White customer. I remember he went in. I remember the first time we did it, was so funny. It was like, the lady was there. I don't know, Maria or something, and like we were there, and he she's there, beeping the stuff, before self-service. She's beeping the stuff, and he goes, "Hello, Maria," and she just sort of looks at him, and then like looks down and goes, "Hi," and Dad was like, "Oh." He spent so much effort into having. He says it's so awkward when you go to the customer checkout, and I call them by their first name, and they just have to call me some guy or hi or hey you. He goes, "Don't worry, I'm going to solve that problem by putting on a name tag," and it didn't work. Dad just put it in the drawer. It never got used again. You know what I mean? But yeah, so as the ordinary person isn't really questioning their reality. The first thing we do is to question that reality. In the Matrix, remember it's the beginning. He's searching and he's searching and he's searching. Yeah. And the guardian threshold in the Matrix is actually when he touches the mirror, yeah? And he touches the mirror and he has to confront this fear, and this thing starts going all over him, So the guardian threshold is happens in the astral, and we are confronted by a huge monster. And that monster is actually our ego. That's what it is. It's not just a monster. It's not make-believe. We are confronted by our own demon of desire, which is one of the three main capital parts of our ego that we'll talk about a little bit later on. And so we're confronted by that ego, and it has a hypnotic power, yeah? And we have to pass that test, we have to confront that beast, even though it's quite scary. You know what I mean? Even though we will probably lose, we have to confront it. And I've seen people like that before. I know, like, the same thing, a guy had that. He saw a big troll in his garden, and then, he went, for some reason there was a sword, and then he said, usually I just run away, but I don't know, I decided I'd just go for it, And I remember another guy had an experience a lot of times. There was like in Perth, they were building a new tunnel, and he used to have to drive past it every day on the way to work, and there was this huge black tunnel, and many times, he actually failed this test 3 times. You can fail the total of 4 times and then the path is closed. But you can fail it 3 times. But he failed it quite a few times because he would go and he could hear the thing breathing, like this sort of, in the darkness, this huge dark tunnel. And you could just see these 2 like eyes, in the tunnel. And he said every time he'd run away, and then finally one day, he said he failed. He's a South American guy, had a really strong astral capacity. And I remember he said he failed it like 3 times. And the last time, he said, I pray to my divine mother so hard. My divine mother, please give me the power to pass on the test. And that night he had the experience. And he said every time he had a sword, and he just ran screaming into the tunnel. And when he got there, it was like a little thing. I think it was like a toy or something. It was with just like a voice box. So this is the guardian of the threshold. I mean, I've heard of people seeing it as a giant ape or a giant gorilla, full of force and very intimidating. And so to pass this test, a person has to be able to confront that. And that means the beginning of the path, actually being able to confront this dark sort of demon that is ourselves. Yeah. So the second test of the probationary path is the test of the 4 elements. Yeah. So the test of the 4 elements are, in no particular order, fire, air, earth, and water, yeah? And these are going to be repeated throughout the entire path. If you can imagine, it's kind of like, like when they do those, have you ever seen those, when they send an astronaut into space? Before they send the astronaut into space, they like prepare them for space, and they like put them in that big like merry-go-round thing and like spin them around really fast. And then they like throw them in the water and make them kind of like jump, like try to deal with this giant stupid pack in the water and stuff like that. And they sort of are preparing them. So these are 4, again, probationary. These are 4 beginning tests, because all the other tests will be a higher octave of these. We want to climb these 3 mountains, and at base camp we actually have to make sure we're ready to be able to handle the 4 elements, because the 4 elements will be the impressions and will be the difficult impressions that we will receive during the whole esoteric path. So we have to make an initial start. So the test of the fire is sweetness and serenity. This means to be able to conquer one's sweetness. Like, he's a sweet guy. You know, I like him. He's a sweet guy. You understand? Like a nice person. Like you eat something, it's sweet. So serenity and sweetness. It means to be to be able to deal with one's anger. If you can't work on your anger at all, how will you? Sorry.
It's serenity and sweetness.
Sweetness.
Sweet.
Not sweetness.
Oh, did I spell it wrong? Is it me?
Yeah,
Is it two
makes
E's?
sense.
Is it like that? Sweetness? Is it two E's or EA? I always forget.
And that relates to anger.
Yes. Yeah, it relates here to anger, but also it relates to our passions. So it's also a little bit to do with sexual passions as well. You know, it's to do with being able to control one's passions. You know what I mean? If we have no control of the passions, how are we ever going to walk this esoteric path? Yeah, we get into one. Imagine you get given this power in the later esoteric part of the path that lets you lets you move and transform matter, and you get upset with someone, so you turn them into, you just destroy them. Like, what's that going to do? You hear about these Tibetan lamas who have the power to move mountains with their word. Imagine, a guy gets your coffee wrong and you just blow him up. Yeah? Someone has vocal fry and you decide to destroy their car. Like, come on, man. You have to be able to control yourself, yeah? You want to have all the initiatic powers, but then at the same time, you can't be a fool. So the fire is serenity and sweetness. It means to control our passions. So this can be seen like, well, I remember this test myself. I remember standing for a giant wall of fire like that. I failed it. In that time, I don't remember passing it. I don't remember the dream of passing it, but I remember the dream of failing it. And I remember just this huge wall that was just insurmountable, just this huge fire, because I was having a hard time as a young man controlling my sexual passions. I was really struggling with that. And then I saw this huge fiery wall like that, like, wow, how am I supposed to go through this? So in the old days, they used to do this by walking across the fire. Remember the fire walkers? They walk across the coals. And the idea was if a person was completely chaste and if a person had fantastic control of their passions, they would walk across without burning their feet. You know what I mean? We live in a very different society nowadays, so we do this one internally. Yeah, so serenity, the ability to control our passions. The test of the air is a test of attachment. You might have seen this one in the internal worlds before. Falling. Wow, like that. You know what I mean? They're falling from a great height. And if we scream out, we go back to the body and we don't pass. So we have to be able to be detached from the situations of life. Obviously, it also has a little bit to do with fear, the fear of death. No one who fears death will be able to get anywhere in the esoteric path. I don't mean as in not to have that fear, but to be able to have at least some control. You understand? This isn't about dissolving the ego yet. That'll come later. This has got to do with being able to have enough control to start the path. Yeah? If a person's entire life is lived by the process of fear, they're never going to get anywhere. So we have to be able to detach from the situations of life, detach from fear, detach from the fear of death, etc., to a degree. So as I said, falling. If we fall there serenely, whoa, hello ground, whoa, then we pass that test. You know what I mean? Okay, water. To flow in social situations. Aha. You know what? Most of the esoteric path, this is going to blow your minds, but most of working on the ego is actually dealing with people. Like a lot of people, they want to live the esoteric path. They're like, I'm going to be really spiritual. I'm going to go and live in a small hovel in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to go live in a tiny little hovel, in a tiny little house. Like there's not even really a house. It doesn't have any windows and there's mosquitoes and everything. And I'm gonna awaken consciousness by sitting there in my hovel. It's not it. The reality is to die, which is very important for the esoteric path because the three factors is what really moves the path. To die, we're mostly dealing with death, in psychological death, that is, in the physical circumstances, in the social circumstances. When I'm dealing with my friends, when I'm dealing with the person at work, and I actually decide to work on that ego, I decide to sacrifice my own vanity, whatever it is, in order to actually have a good relationship and then die in that defect and slowly release from myself all of these attachments to creation, all of these egos and desires that keep me trapped in the world. So for that, I have to learn to flow in social circumstances. So in the same sense, this test is like us being dropped in the water, dropped there. And I know many people had this. This for me was a really simple, I remember this one, it was really simple. It was like a puddle and I just jumped over it. Because this was a really easy test for me because, I don't know, but I'm pretty good socially. I found it very easy growing up. And so this test was very easy. I remember like that. It was like there was this puddle like this. I think it looked like a lake. It looked like a lake originally, and I was walking there with all the members of my friends from the group, and we're walking along, and then I saw this come up. Like, Samael says it's like being dropped in a giant ocean, but I've heard lots of people have the test very different ways. And so it came like that. There was a big lake, and then they were going to walk around it, and I said, let's just go through it. You know what I mean? They said, no, and they all started walking around it like this really long way to try and get around this puddle. And then when I walked up to this lake, and when I walked up to it, it just became a puddle, and I like jumped, and there was like a gum tree, and I jumped and just swung over it, and then landed on the other side, and then I literally heard doo-doo, and it said, you have passed the test of the water. That's how I know it was the test of the water and not just jumping over a puddle. And then I heard this beautiful music, and I actually found it later on. It was called it often gets attributed to the Dalai Lama, the Mahara something. This is beautiful singing, and what it was is I became the water, and I moved with the water, and I heard the beautiful singing. And later on I found it's a Swedish monk who converted to Tibetan Buddhism, did this beautiful singing, and I'd never heard it before in my life ever. And then I was at my friend's house, and he started playing on the computer. I was like, that's the test of the water. I remember hearing that beautiful sound. And so I flowed with the water, had a beautiful experience, yeah? Because when we finish these tests, there's always celebration in the internal worlds. And so I experienced that celebration. For another friend, the one I told you about who had the experience with the troll, he didn't believe he'd passed the guiding threshold, but then he literally had this experience. I remember he told us, he said, I was in, Sean, can I ask you about a dream I had last night, mate? And Dad's like, yeah, okay, yeah, tell me. He goes, yeah, last night I was in this, it was this giant ocean, and I was in the boat, and I jumped out of the boat, and I swam all the way down there. And he said I had to sort of go all the way down. There was like a sort of a cave, and I had to swim through the cave, and then I came up the other side. And when I came up, I walked out on the sand, and then there was a sign. It just said, "You've passed the test of the water." And he goes, "What do you think that means?" My dad was like, "I think maybe you passed the test of the water." And he's like, "Oh, no. I mean, I haven't finished guarding threshold." And my dad said, "Well, think back. Do you remember having a fight with a giant monster?" He goes, "Oh, no. Oh, except this one time, I got attacked by a giant troll in my backyard. And usually I would have ran away, but I just went for it." He's a really Australian guy, showing that the initiations don't mean you have to be like this fantastic cultured person, Because this is what it's like in the Masons. It's like you had to learn Latin and Greek and all this sort of thing and have 100 things and have special smoking rooms and cognacs and all this sort of stuff, and then you could be an initiate. Whereas I've met some guys who are rough as guts, man, and they're beautiful. They're walking this esoteric path. And you feel it inside of them. There's something really real about them. There's some force about them. Master Ravelu, for instance, Samael's closest disciple, was illiterate until later on. He couldn't read or write. He was a farmer, a coffee farmer. So, so to flow in social situations. Samael says we're dropped into a giant ocean. If we scream out, and drown because we can't cope, well, then we fail. If not, we pass. Okay, the test of the earth. And take with pleasure the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow man. This means, and this specific thing, to take with pleasure the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow man. This means, and I've mentioned it quite a few times in class, to be able, as he said, to use the difficult situations of life to work on myself. If I blame everybody else for all my problems all the time, I can't walk the path. It will never work. The whole path of the awakening of the fire and all the beautiful initiations will never happen because I can never work. I can't take the situation. When somebody says something mean to me, I just get angry. I don't take those situations. When a person, like for instance at work, or if something happens at work that's negative, rather than, oh, that's it, I've got to change jobs, I actually stop and go, okay, let's look at my psychology. Yeah. So to take with pleasure, to realize that the people around you give you really good opportunities to see yourself. Like I remember that time when I was quite young, and I remember this lady just tore me to pieces. I was working in a cafe and she just ripped me to shreds. She completely shredded my personality and my ego there. She told me, she was a Pisces, really intuitive, and she just went, wow, like that. Just, you're this, you're that, you're arrogant, you're rude, you're proud. She just hit me like that. So harsh. I remember really suffering. I was 18, she was 16. I kind of was struggling, and she was a woman. I was a 16-year-old boy, That was great. When I went to meditate afterwards, when I was looking at that ego, I started to see that I didn't want to listen to her just because she was younger and she was a woman. And it was great for me. I actually got to see inside myself these egos that I didn't realize I had. So this is what it means to take with pleasure. You know, afterwards, I didn't thank her directly because she would have thought I was being sarcastic. You know what I mean? But I was really nice to her afterwards because I thought, man, she's perfect. She really shows me. I had an experience once about one of my very, very, very close friends that she's very harsh on me and always has been, this friend of mine. And I had an experience once that her being really loves my being really deeply. And that's why the personality of that, the body, the personality, the bodhisattva of that being is so cruel to me, because that being wants my being to awaken. That being wants me to awaken. Do you know what I mean? So the beings are friends, and everything she gives me is beautiful. I had this beautiful experience. It was like I was at a retreat it was internal, it was in the astral. And I was at a retreat, and I was feeling really sorry for myself because somebody made fun of me. And I was lying on the couch and I was like, oh, poor me. Oh, someone was being rude to me. Oh, poor me. And everyone else came in. Oh, Mick, are you okay? Are you all right? You know, my other friends, are you okay? You know, are you okay? And then that close friend came in and she's like, what are you doing? Get your bloody self-compassion out of here. What's wrong with you? Get out. You're ridiculous. She started beating me with a stick. Like that. Whack, whack, whack. And then, I was like, oh. And then I got up. Ow, you know, I was all beaten. Ow. I got up. And then, I had this experience. Her being really loves your being. That's why she's doing this to you. So you can wake up. And I was like, oh, wow. You know? So we don't understand. So when someone does something bad to you, this is great. Yeah? When you don't get the pay rise, when someone doesn't acknowledge how fantastic you are, you know what I mean? When whatever, you know, you do the job. What was it? I did this job. I did this job. I was repairing a piece of 110-year-old timber. Like, you just don't get it. It's so difficult to do these sorts of jobs, you know, like, because the timber cut, you can't get it anymore. I had to do this whole complicated thing. I had to get another piece of timber and I do all these special fancy cuts. And I basically did a full woodworking shop just out the front of their house out the back of my car. This whole thing, you know, it was very complicated. I did this whole thing. I redid it. I put it all nicely and then I painted it. And I found a paint that was fairly close to the color, but it rotted out because it's bloody, what do you call it? It's out, it's down in a valley in Bangalore. It's just completely just humid, and there's all green, like the whole thing's green, you know, and dirty, and it's all rotted out. So I did this whole job, and the guy who lived there, he's like one of those real flatterers. Oh, I love what you're doing here. I love it. He works in film. I love what you're doing. It's amazing, beautiful, wonderful, so nice. It's great, you know. But his wife is just the opposite. And I remember I did this beautiful thing. I put it all in there. I couldn't believe it. I got it in there perfectly. It looked exactly the same. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I actually did that. It actually looks perfect. And then I painted it, you know, and she walks out. And she's just been arguing with her husband. She walks out, she just looks at him and goes, the paint color doesn't match. And then just walks back in. And it was just like, I remember just feeling like, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, my brand new paint doesn't match your 100-year-old paint, which is covered in green mold. I was just like, but look at the work I did. Look at how, do you not appreciate my work? And I remember just feeling like, I was sort of really upset there for a bit. And, you know, as I was driving home, I was like, complaining, arguing with her in my mind, you know, trying to explain that, you know, in 3 weeks, it's going to be the same shade of green, lady. All this sort of stuff. And, you know, like, would you rather I bleach the whole front deck? And I was carrying on. And then I was like, after a while, I was sort of driving around, getting to the next job. I thought, what am I doing? This lady has shown me my pride. Do you know what I mean? Here I am. I'm liking the man. Do you know what I mean? Because he's a flatterer. Before I even did any work, he was telling me I did a good job. You know, I didn't even do anything yet. He's like, oh, great, it's amazing. I haven't done anything yet. Oh, I'm sure it'll be great once it's done. And he's like that sort of guy. You know, he's a flatterer. You know, he speaks beautifully even if you've done nothing. You know what I mean? And then you actually do something and she's the opposite. So I found myself, I like him. Why do I like him? Because of pride. I like the guy who tells me this. But then this is not really the guy you need in your life. Do you know what I mean? Because you're never going to know about yourself because he just tells you what you want to hear. Whereas she's pretty good. She's going to tell you the truth. You know what I mean? If you're what is it? You're a bit fat or your shirt's sticking out, she's going to tell you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And that's good. You can improve. You can change, you can die. Someone like that's good. I like him in the teachings of Carlos Castaneda. If you ever have a chance to read, really good teachings, really good. Don Juan Matus, his teacher, says that we should find ourselves a petty tyrant. And he says the ultimate tyrant is the demiurge, is actually creation. Creation is the ultimate tyrant because you're stuck here and you have to live life after life after life. You have to get up every day, make breakfast for the kids. You know what I mean? You have to go through it all, go to work, come back. What's it? Old Gil from The Simpsons. He goes, I'm always broke. I don't understand. All I ever do is work. That's how it is. That's the ultimate tyrant. Creation just bashing you down every time. You make a nice house and then you get wood rot. You know what I mean? It's just the way it is. And so they said the ultimate tyrant is creation itself. But therefore, any other person, even if the person physically beats you or tortures you, is still a petty tyrant compared to creation, which is the ultimate tyrant. So Don Juan Matus tells Carlos, he said, Carlos, you need to find a petty tyrant. Because a petty tyrant will show you about yourself. Yeah? You have a boss or something who's just so rude or something, and that person is perfect to work on your ego. I had the best petty tyrant ever, and I lost him. I don't know if he still lives around here. I don't know if you ever met, oh my God, I can't remember his name. Elias? No. Ruby, do you remember the name? I forgot his name now, the Spanish guy. That guy he was the best petty tyrant around. He used to live out the Byron Industrial. We tried to start a cafe together when I was here 12 years ago. Eli. My God. I should fuzzy it out in the recording. Sorry?
A nasty Yoda.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't a Yoda at all. He wasn't a Yoda at all. He was just nasty. But I remember everybody hated this guy. He lived at CrossFit. He used to get up in the morning. I think I've already talked about it in the class before. This guy literally had the idea. This was his philosophy. His philosophy on life was this. Yeah, his philosophy was all Australian men are gay. Every single one of them are gay, and that's because they don't have mandatory military service. If we all spent 2 years in the military like he did in Spain, then in Madrid, then we would not be gay. And that's the biggest problem. He then goes on to talk about how his last 4 girlfriends are effing bees because they all put restraining orders out against him when they got new girlfriends and he went and punched them. You know what I mean? And he's like, and this was this guy. He was just, but you know what? I've said this before. He was a Pisces and he was so intuitive. And he was just so intuitive and he would deconstruct me like no one else. He would notice my little egos that want to please people. Often you get away with that. You get away with people pleasing egos because everybody likes people pleasing egos because they're pleasing people. Yeah, you please a person, they go, oh, that person, they're so pleasing. But he would catch me every time. You're like, you know why you suck at business? Yeah, because you care what people think about you. You care what they feel. You got to stop caring, little man. It's just like and he was so difficult. And every day I'd go in there and he was just the worst. He was the worst. And he was just so hard. And he annoyed everybody, But in the end, I lost that one. We had an argument and I left. And yeah, it was dumb because he was really good. He told me, Samael and Weor, who gave us this teaching, had a petty tyrant. There was a man who Samael used to take his manuscripts or his new books, and the guy was really critical, really critical sort of guy, really intense with the grammar, everything, really critical, really full. And Samael would give him his manuscripts for his new book. Samael wrote 66 books, and he would give him the manuscript every time he wrote the book and get the guy to read it. Well, I don't know every time, but for a while. And the guy, I remember that I can't remember if Samael or someone else tells a story, this guy was reading the book and he started just ripping it to pieces. All this stuff, all you talk about is sex. You just repeat yourself over and over again. You're ridiculous. If you've read Gnostic books and you've heard other people, this is what people say. And he's carrying on, having a go at him. You say it's all about sex, it's ridiculous. And he kept going. He said, Samael, finally, he's just sitting there. And Samael just stood up and he ripped off his shirt. He was so angry that he grabbed his shirt and ripped it off, like all the buttons, bang, 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 like that. And he goes, that shirt just saved your life. And then he stormed out, and he walked the whole way home. And he's like, little Lana's like, what are you doing? You're home early. And Alder, you're home early. What are you doing, Victor? And he's just like, and he starts saying, this guy's ridiculous. He's ridiculous. And, I give it to him. All he's got to do is correct the grammar, but he comes at me. And he's, all right, getting really out. And she listens to him really nicely. And then she goes, you're ridiculous. She goes, that man is showing you the real you. What are you doing? Go back there immediately. And he's just like, you're entirely right. So he said he went and put a new shirt on. He walks back. He goes to the guy, he goes, I'm terribly sorry for my behavior. And then he sits down and he goes, go on. It's like, oh my God, this is beautiful. You see? Because you're there and you're struggling. This is what it means. You take with pleasure the unpleasant manifestation of your fellow man. We do that with our kids, yeah? Because we have love. We have to learn to do it with everybody. It's very hard, but we have to learn. Learn that the person who's usually attacking you is usually totally full of pain. It doesn't mean that you have to put up with really bad behavior. If a person's hurting you, that's different, you know what I mean? Or staying in a really negative situation. I'm talking about working on yourself. I'm talking about actually understanding your defects. And for that, you're going to have to learn to take with pleasure the unpleasant manifestations of your fellow man, or you're just never going to be able to die. Yeah? So that's the test here. That's the 4 elemental tests, the beginning of the Esoteric Path. And we often see these in the astral. The earth, therefore, is seeing oneself between 2 mountains that threaten to crush us. And if we scream, like in, what's it called? Star Wars. Yeah, I always give that example. In Star Wars, with the garbage chute, and it's like starting to crush them. The original Star Wars, the good one with Han Solo. And it's starting to crush them, yeah, that's what it's like, yeah? Or the, what's the one, Ruby, in the, we really, like my kids, we read beautiful amounts of fairy tales. And there's one where like the knight gets stuck between 2 mountains, and the mountains move in behind him, and he gets so close he just has to sit on his horse, and he's just stuck between 2 mountains like that, and he can't move.
The Water of Life, I think.
The Water of Life, beautiful, beautiful story. You should read fairy tales. Yeah, fairy tales are full of esoteric knowledge. You know what I mean?
Story's got that in it too.
Yeah.
He
So
races on the horse, which I guess represents liberation and freedom, and he's got the two castle giants closing in to close the portal.
that's beautiful.
It's got all those initiations. Those initiations are very common in initiation culture.
The 4 testing elements, yes.
Yeah. Those there, I've been through those in physical form many, many times and facilitated. It's interesting. So you're saying, just real quick, I want to clarify something. You can fail 4.
You can fail 3 times, and then that's it. Afterwards, you're out.
But in terms of going through those, you can go through those tests multiple times.
Well, it depends. Samael says you're going to go through them once the beginning of the path, and then they will repeat at higher octaves as you go along.
That's what I'm saying, because I feel like I've been through those multiple times, multiple levels.
Yes.
Internal, external.
Every test will have elements of them inside. But these are like the initial tests. You know what I mean? The initial test of the elements. Okay, let's continue, because it's kind of a big topic. Okay, so next, the 9 minor initiations. Now, Samael doesn't say much about these. He just says that the 9 minor initiations are different for each person, and that they are specifically about creating the necessary virtues to walk the path that we will need. Virtues like, for instance, such as like humility, or virtues such as, diligence. One of the big ones is going to be discernment. Without a good discernment, the esoteric path is not going to work. They used to use the word discrimination back in the days, but now that's just completely just only about black people, so it doesn't work. But discernment means to be able to judge between 2 things, to actually see, like you look at something to discern whether something's true or false, you know what I mean? To see whether something is correct or incorrect. We need to have discernment in order to read spiritual things, otherwise we can get really lost. People without discernment often can walk on can start walking on the black path thinking they're walking the white path because they don't know the difference. That's what happened in the Second World War with Hitler and the Nazis. They were originally doing some esoteric work, not this, but they were doing certain esoteric studies and work. They were practicing the alchemy, actually. And then they had a man come out from Tibet, and they assumed that everyone from Tibet was white magic and fantastic, and the guy with the green gloves came, he was actually teaching black tantra, and he took them out of the esoteric path and put them into the black path, and that's when they started to really fall apart, which is true. If you look at the very beginning of that whole time, everybody was talking about how Germany was the poster child for the whole world. Everybody wanted to be like Germany. And then suddenly Germany started to become kind of evil. You know what I mean? And that's because they originally were practicing the alchemy. These guys, they're politicians. And then they slowly started to, then this other guy came along and taught them all this sort of stuff. And suddenly they were full of desire for power, and then they wanted to conquer the whole world. Well. If you had a bit of discernment, you would have been able to realize, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to lose a sexual fluid. I don't want to practice black tantra, you know? But too bad. So that's one of the tests of the virtues of the path. Okay. So the last test of the esoteric path, if we're looking here, it's just before the end, in our little image, is the test of justice. And this is the test that has to come before the awakening of the fire. So a person won't awaken the fire unless they've gone through this test. The test of justice is to be wrongly accused. Yeah? Yeah, it's to be wrongly accused. So a person actually goes through a process of being wrongly accused. And this can be all sorts of things. It depends on... and in that sense, it'll be almost everybody around you will suddenly accuse you of something. And in this moment, you have to be able to take that without complaining and just deal with it. So it'll be in such a way that you actually don't have to do anything. But if you try to defend yourself, you will fail. So, for instance, as an example, I knew a guy who was accused of infidelity in the Gnostic group, and they didn't even ask him if he did it. It was just like he walked in one day and the lady was crying and she said, oh, he did this and this and this to me and rah, rah, rah. And they didn't even ask him. The guy running, it was in South America, in Venezuela, the guy didn't even ask. The guy just said, oh, this is disgusting. How could you do such a thing? This is revolting. I can't believe this. This is ridiculous. And, rah, rah. And the whole group, oh, he's a horrible person. He's the worst person. Rah, rah. And he didn't even, he said what actually happened was she was interested in him. She asked him out to a thing and he jilted her a little bit roughly when he tells the story. He tells it like he's completely infallible, but when you hear it, it's like literally, he's like, I do not speak to women like this. I'm like, come on, dude. But anyway, so he said that he sort of jilted her, and then she fabricated this whole story, and it got him in a lot of trouble. But what happened was, the guy said go home, so he went home, and then the next day he came back to class. The guy said, what are you doing here? And he said, oh, I come to the class. He goes, leave. So he left. And the next day he came back again, you know what I mean? And then the guy said, leave, okay. But then the last time, I think he was almost about to leave, you know, he's like, what am I going to do? But then he went back the next time and the instructor was just like, nice to see you again. Like nothing happened, you know, everything's fine. And it turned out that she got outed. She got in trouble. Something happened. And the whole thing blew over, and everyone realized. Not everyone realized. So a lot of people still think he did it. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it came out eventually that the whole thing was sort of a fabrication. You know what I mean? And so, you know, and this can happen. You know, this can happen. I know the same situation of a man like that who was in a relationship with a woman, and then everybody turned against them and thought that how do I put it? Everybody turned against them and sort of said, you know, that relationship wasn't supposed to be, and la-di-da, and everyone got involved and all this sort of thing. And and then, but that man was never asked at one point, did you do anything wrong? Everyone was talking. There was emails flying around everywhere saying that he did this and he did that, but no one ever asked him directly, so he had to sit there and just be quiet. If someone asks you, you can say no, but that's it. Someone says, did you do that? And you go, no. Not no, and how dare you ask? How dare you say that to me, you horrible person? And I saw you doing this last week with that other person, and you've got the gall to come to me and call me a bad person when you are the worst type of person. How dare you say that to me? You know, again, how are you going to work on yourself? Yeah. So in that situation, you use that situation to work on yourself. You don't complain. You sit there and you deal with that situation and you work on the egos that come up. Because you know what? I remember someone asked me once. I remember when when I was younger and when I was getting together with my now wife, I remember her parents weren't as super happy with me in the beginning. And I remember we had a few arguments and they weren't very happy with me. And I remember they came and had a go at me once. I just sort of sat there and just talked and it said nothing. And it was like that for a while. They would come and have a go at me and I'd just say nothing and, simply. But I remember someone asked me once, it was a big burly Scotsman. He was like, why do you take that? Why do you take that from them? Why do you do that? I said, well, one day they're going to turn around when we're married. They're going to turn around and sort of say, oh, well, do you know what I mean? Like, oh, sorry. But if I attacked them and was cruel to them the whole time, they're not going to be able to say sorry because now there's going to be wrongs on both sides. So I'll just wait and work on my ego until that time comes. And that's exactly what happened. Eventually that time came and now everything's fine and reconciled. So this is what it means. I'm going to work on me. Obviously, this is a much deeper test of the earth, yeah? And then fire, passion, and kind of a bit of all of it, really. But you're going to have to take that. Now, when a person can do that, they're ready to awaken the fire. A person can take that complete public outrage, etc. They can awaken. And I've seen this happen lots. I saw a guy, he had a group with like 25 Gnostic people, and one day, so there was some trouble brewing in the class. One of his students wanted to take over the class because he was a homophobic, anti-Semitic, what else is he? What else? Homophobic, anti-Semitic, telling people about their egos. You just talk about my egos in class. You just point all our defects out while you're full of defects. Anyway, common problem. And so he was, I remember the whole group just rose up against him. And one day he came to go to class. He was running the class in his house, right? But he would sit in his own room and do meditation before class. He came out for meditation. He walked into the room and everybody was sitting in a big circle. And there was like a chair there for him. There was like an intervention. And they were like, yeah, we can't deal with you anymore. You're you're just not a good instructor and you don't know how to run the group. And we want this guy to run the group. And you see, it was a wrong accusation. You know what I mean? Yeah, he's not telling he's a Gnostic instructor. He's supposed to tell people about their egos. That's what they want. You know what I mean? And they're like, you tell us about our egos. He's like, yeah, sorry. You know what I mean? But you see, this is the thing. So they wrongly accused him, etc., etc. He actually deflated that situation beautifully. What he did was he got a chair and then he put it in front of each person individually, one by one. And he said, okay, I want to apologize, but I'm not just going to say sorry to everybody because I need to know what each of your problems is with me because everybody keeps saying a different thing. So he sat one person at a time like that in front of each person. And he said, what's the problem? And he said he was amazed. Some of the quietest members of the group. He's like, whoa. Like usually they just sit there in the class. And then when they're like, how dare you? You say this and you do that. It's like, oh, wow. Okay. You're quiet, but not in the mind, huh? And so, yeah, he said, and then at the last person he talked to, who was the last person? It was the guy who set it all up. And then the guy said, I goes, oh, no, I've already talked to everybody else. And I've said sorry to everyone. What's your problem? And the guy said, no, well, no, not we. There's no we. I've talked to everybody and I've solved all their problems. What's your problem? And so he disarmed him. The whole group the next day went back to normal. Obviously there was a little bit of grating. My favorite part of that was there was one guy who didn't know what was happening. And he was just like, he sits in front of me and goes, okay, what's your problem? And he goes, so how have I hurt you? What can I do? And he goes, oh, I'm fine. He said, I just came for a meditation. I didn't know this was going to happen tonight. Yeah.
Even that mimics. That is an initiatory process. It's called like they call it a reckoning council, or so it's literally a process that gets the indigenous practice. I've been in those where like that exact scenario where it's played out for initiation reasons. Yeah. In that exact same format. So a lot of these things are mimicking ancient.
It's ancient knowledge.
Rituals.
That's the whole point. Yes, of course.
Like that's an actual ritual that they follow. And it's literally with and the way they do it is they do it with a log that's almost impossible to pick up. So you're literally lifting the log and putting it in front of the next person and sitting in front of them while they basically tear you apart in front of all of the people that you respect.
Well, these all come from through Lemuria, like all the Aboriginal cultures from Lemuria, all of the South American cultures from Atlantis. Like this is ancient knowledge. It's always been, it's been passed down. And okay, it loses a little bit of it, but it's still there. You know what I mean? It'll always be the same. And in the end, it'll keep going. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not just internal, because these are things that are
Yeah.
rituals.
Well, some of these things can be lived publicly, of course. Some of these can be lived physically, of course. 100%. I mean, this is a physical test. This particular one, not internal. It's still an internal process. Like you only pass it if you've internally changed. You can't just do it and have all the right. You can't have all the right answers. So I said I'd mention the difference between test and karma. So a test is where you are confused. Confused in Portuguese. That's a bad joke. When you're confused, you know what I mean? You're confused and you don't remember everything. It's like, like in the astral, you don't remember, oh, I'm a Gnostic, and I don't want to be egotistical, so I'm just gonna walk through this fire and it's all good. You don't remember the esoteric, you don't remember all of the things to work on yourself. In that moment, you are completely your psychology. And you know what I mean? Like at night time where you're your worst self. Nighttime, it's late, no one else is around, and you're like the worst version of yourself. You're there in the fridge, stealing things, that sort of thing, and there looking at maybe weird things on your phone that you shouldn't look at. You know what I mean? Dark things, all this sort of stuff. The worst parts of yourself, you see them in the astral. So that's what's going to come out. If you have actually changed internally, you'll pass that test. It's true, the guiding threshold has been lived physically in different ways. For instance, a person can pass the guiding threshold by completely divesting all their defects publicly. And there are some processes people try to do that, you know what I mean? Like, that's what Carlos told Don Juan to do. He said, just find somebody and tell him everything. Tell him every defect you have. And he said, don't worry, just tell anyone. It's like a guy at the bus stop or something. And Don Juan, Carlos did it. He just told some guy, he sat down and just told him every problem, every defect, every horrible thought he's ever had. Can you imagine the guy? Yeah,
and that gets ritualized. In ceremony.
Yeah, this used to be a thing, you know what I mean? It's the guy, but that'll help. Maybe, it depends on the process, but that can make a person pass the guiding threshold. I remember my dad had an experience with one of our friends who had passed that test. She like, I think I mentioned this before in another class, she grew up on the streets and she had a really hard childhood and stuff, and then she went to that, like, she had a kid with this guy who's now in prison, and then she was at this mother's group, and then they had to like all say the worst thing you've ever done, and the worst things you've ever done, and like all the other, and so she wrote it all down. Then all the other mothers were going, oh, once I accidentally spilt my husband's eggs on the floor, and I just wiped it up and pretend it didn't happen, and things like that. And she's like there looking at her list. It's like growing up on the streets. Like she's got some pretty gnarly things in there about like drugs and things she's done to buy drugs, and so it just comes to her and she just goes. And so she just reads this like just intense full, and it's not like it's in one of those settings, like where you're in like a men's circle and everyone's ready for it, like, okay, talk, mate. It's like this was the setting of no one wanted to hear this, and all the other, she said no one looked at it the whole time she read it out. And then she's like, all right. And then afterwards they're all like hugging each other, like, oh, good job, darling. Oh yes, you're a strong woman. I love it. Thank you. This is fantastic. And oh yes. And she's like, no one hugged her. They were all just like, oh my God, you're disgusting. How could you do that? Yeah, you had a question, Juliana? Sorry?
Okay. So this is like, is you with you, or you are sharing with someone, like with a mentor?
No, the path is individual. So they're still sharing in the sense that through the practice of alchemy and stuff, we work together, but the path is individual. You know what I mean?
Like working together with your partner?
Yes.
But not with, for example, like you are our teacher.
Yes.
So do we talk as well about what's going on?
Oh, you can ask questions and things like that, but generally speaking, it's internal. It's your work, your psychological work. You can ask for help, but I can't do anything for you on the path.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question though, because back in the day, the guru would have been, so everyone has a guru internally. It's like a teacher in the astral. Do you know what I mean? And if we work really hard, like for instance, we can form a relationship, for instance, like with the Master Samael internally, he can teach us and we can get those teachings. These are the teachings they're giving you now. You can get the teachings in the internal world. It's fantastic, And he can guide you on the path. When you want help, you can ask, you know what I mean? And we build up that relationship slowly. But in the old days, it used to be that you had a physical guru. It's very much like Tibetan Buddhism. You had a physical guru, and then the guru would like guide you on the path. But nowadays, not so much.
Or the tribe.
Sorry?
Or the community.
Yeah.
Those
But even then, you always have someone. There's always someone who's like the person who's walked before you. You know what I mean? It's not the guys behind you who are helping you really as such. Maybe they're helping you a little bit, but not. I'm talking about a person leading you on the path, like the next link above you in the chain, who's actually pulling you forwards and helping you through that process that they've been through. You know, so you can be guided and helped, of course, a lot by the instructor. Even this process, right, we're doing right now, I'm teaching you the esoteric path, but mostly it's internal. It's your path. You know what I mean? And if for instance, if you were to die, you would when you're reborn, you'd still be reborn in the same part of the path you were on before. You know what I mean? A person reincarnates. You could lose it again at the beginning of the life. That happens all the time. You know, a person spends a bunch of time creating all this stuff, gets to a certain point, and then the next life they just fornicate, lose a lot. But it's still our path. Even though you may be practicing alchemy with somebody, which is a prerequisite to starting the major path, you're still going to have like separate paths. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're going to go through your tests at your time. For instance, this test of judgment you'll do on your own. You will go through that process of judgment by yourself, and you'll have to go through that.
And
you may have some support.
Goes on your time as well. Like you can be in a month. You can have 2 initiations. Sometimes it can
Yes, it depends. I know someone. It took 20 years to awaken the fire. 20 years because he had a lot of karma. So it took a long time to get from here to here. Basically, to go from here to here, 20 years.
Yeah.
It can be done in 3 months for an alchemical couple. If you're not practicing the alchemy, no. The alchemy strengthens the whole process dramatically, much faster. And from here, we must have the alchemy to go up here because this is all the creation of the internal bodies. This is all this work, this is alchemical work, but it all works in accordance also with the 3 factors. So once we finish the test of justice, then we awaken the fire. And then obviously that means that up until here, we can do this single. But to go from here, we need to have an alchemical partner. And this is important because it means we can prepare ourselves completely. And there was a time when that's how the internal path of initiation was, where a person would do, like of monks and that, would do almost this entire part on their own, right up until the awakening the fire, have everything perfect. And then after one practice, the fire awakens straight away. And then they're only practicing, say, once a month or something with a specific nun or something. But then they're starting this part of the path here. You know what I mean?
And again, that mimics like I grew up with Aboriginal people, and they'll go through those 4 elements of initiation before a young man can even approach a young woman, or a young woman can even, potentially sexually or otherwise. They can't even approach that until having moved through certain elements of the initiations, which are elemental based. Literal immersion in water, literal contact with fire, literal burial in the earth. These kinds of processes before being allowed to then potentially look for a partner, and they would be independently initiated prior to you.
What they're doing is it's a layer of this sort of initiatic process. This is the one that happens internally, but they sort of have an outwards one that they're using for their puberty process or their process of becoming a man. You know what I mean?
No doubt they're going through that internally, often in a lot of those processes.
Depends.
Or leading up to it. It's done in a way where that's the proper point of it.
Yes, that's what's supposed to happen. But it depends. It depends on the person if they're actually going to go, because it is internal. That's what I was saying before. These physical things, we do them, but it's like we have what's called the repentance program in Second Chamber, which is our sort of core group of Gnosis. And I like Rafael Vargas, who said once, someone asked him, they said, can you do the entire repentance program? It takes 2 to 3 years, right? Can you do that and finish it and not feel any repentance? And Rafael Vargas says, I would really hope not. Like, I really hope not. I hope you couldn't do that whole thing and then not feel anything, because that would be horrible.
Maybe I'll do the weekend version.
It's a pretty serious. We're not going to go into that tonight. Okay, so after here, the awakening of fire. This whole process can be done quite quickly of practicing alchemy, a little bit longer on our own, but in behind this whole process, there is still always these 3 factors are what move us on the esoteric path. So the alchemy, if we don't have the alchemy in this process with some transmutation, of course, we're not going to pass the test of fire unless we're at least working with our sexual energy to a degree. It's just not going to happen. Same with the test of water, it'll be harder. We're beginning to observe my psychology and then sacrifices, yeah? We have to pay our way upon the path. voluntary sacrifices, making sacrifices for our fellow man, helping our fellow man. This isn't like a selfish path where, as I said, I just go off on my own and I live this all internally and then it's done. I do have to work for others. So, the last thing I want to mention before we start talking about the major path is the test of Direna, or the Direne test. I think it's Direna. I'm pretty sure it's Direna because it's a South American word. The Direna test, which is a test of alchemical fidelity. At some point, your alchemical relationship will be tested. Now, for some people, they don't even know about this test because it just came and gone. You know what I mean? Because the relationship's rock solid, but it has to happen. Because if we're going to walk this long path, that relationship has to be tested. That's not really at any specific point. It can even happen in the beginning start of the early, just after the fire. But yeah, at some point or another, we will be tested physically to see how strong that alchemical relationship is, if a person's serious about it or not. And I've heard stories about people who failed that. It's not very nice, you know. Like there was a Gnostic missionary, for instance, he was giving the class, and then a girl comes, a young girl, and then she really enjoys the class. She's really serious Gnostic, comes for 2 nights or something, 2 weeks, you know. And then after one class, she stays and says, "Oh, you know, my father, he's really abusive, rah, rah, can I stay here tonight?" You know what I mean? And like, the guy's like, "Oh, yes, of course, you know, poor young girl, of course, you know what I mean, poor, you know, whatever, 20-year-old girl or something." He's like 40, you know, "Oh, of course, you stay here," you know. And the wife's like, "I don't know, man, like, I don't know about that. Maybe you should ask if she wants to, maybe you shouldn't get involved in this process. Oh, how can we be like that? We have to protect the poor young child, you know, the poor girl." Yeah, one thing leads to another, done. Lost his whole historic process, right back to the beginning. Because, you know, fornicating, his relationship, I don't know if they stayed, I think they did stay together, but it damages the relationship, obviously. Same thing, I heard the same story about a lady, you know, in a relationship for a long time with her husband, and then, you know, just met a nice guy at the shopping centre, a French man at the shopping centre, French-Canadian, sorry, at the shopping centre. And I remember she said each time she kept thinking like, "Oh, I wonder what," the guy said, "Oh, let's go for a walk." She said, "I wonder what happened if I go for a walk." Then he says, then she goes, "Oh," and then she goes for a walk and they're chatting, and then he goes, "Oh, why don't we stop at this cafe?" She goes, "I wonder what happened if I stopped at the cafe." And then you're having coffee, and he goes, "Oh, why don't we go back to my hotel? It's just over there." She goes, "Oh, what happens if I go to his hotel?" She goes to his hotel, and then she walks in the hotel, and then he said, he starts chatting, and then he sits on the bed, and he says, "Oh, why don't you sit next to me?" "Oh, what happened if I sit next to him?" I like what she said. Once she sat next to him, it was over. There was no more, "I wonder what's going to happen after she sat on the bed." You know, and she told the whole process, you know, and that's the Direna test. You know, you say, "Oh, how's this happen?" Well, it happens. I've seen this happen many, many times. At the same time, I've seen people pass it as well. There are many people who pass it don't even recognize it because the relationship's very strong. They don't even notice the other person come along, etc. At the same time, I know people who've passed it, who've had that situation. A person's come into their life, and you can feel that connection, and it's like, whoa. You know, it happened with another friend of mine too. You know, he was in an alchemical relationship with a woman, and then he just met a really nice chick in the surf. You know, he met a really nice chick in the surf. And I like what he said. He goes, "We've just got this connection that I've never felt with my long-term alchemical partner. I've never felt that before. I think maybe she's like my twin soul, my twin flame." You know what I mean? But I tell you, after they consummated the deed, there was no more talk about twin flame or soul. There was just him trying to get back together with his alchemical partner, and she wouldn't have a bar of it. It was over. So that has to happen. Okay, so once we awaken the fire, I have to stipulate that. Once we awaken the fire, we then begin the process of what's called the 3 mountains, which is this that I've written here. It's this part from here up to here. And I'm not going to go too deeply into this because, frankly, this is what's really interesting to us, the awakening of the fire and working and all this sort of thing. This is all very much the next level. So once we awaken that fire, the Kundalini, which is ignited in our spine, as I've showed before, this lovely little thing here. Once the Kundalini ignites at the base of the spine, she then goes up the 33 vertebrae. That's what happens. And she starts in the physical body. And that is the first initiation. And we call it the first initiation of fire. because the fire, the Kundalini fire, is rising through the spine like that. And we will go through various tests, physically and internally, as we go through the 33 vertebrae. A person with a lot of sensitivity can feel that. I remember one of my Gnostic teachings, Raphael Arape. I was in his study once, and I looked up at the wall, and he had like a picture, like a big poster of the spine, and all these things written on it and stuff. And he goes, "That's my map." You know, he was very, very, he had a very strong, like, awakened internal senses. And when he went through the process of fire, he felt it, you know, and he, not the whole lot, but a lot of it. And so he knew the tests he was going through. He knew where the fire was moving. And when it would get stuck here and it wouldn't move, and because he needed to dissolve another defect or practice the alchemy more, you know, in order to move it up. And so that fire goes up, and it ascends first through the physical body. Then it ascends in the second initiation through the vital body. And once it fully ascends, it goes all the way up here, up their spine, like that, and then it goes up to the third eye, which is why if you see in the beautiful Egyptian busts, you know, the Egyptian heads, the pharaohs, they have the little snake on the head like that. Yeah, which because originally the what do you call them, the priests, the king priests and everything were awake completely. They had the fire awake. They were masters. In fact, they often had a snake and also a vulture on the top of the head like that. They've had two, and one represents the awakening of the Kundalini fire. The other one represents the fifth initiation, the mastery. So once that serpent ascends the physical body, it then goes through the vital spine in the vital body, then through the astral, the mental, until it reaches the place of will. And as it does that, it will go through, and it will, if we don't have the astral body, it will create the astral body, which is the process of the solar bodies, the lecture that we gave on the soul and man a little while ago. The same in the mind. And then once we reach this point, we'll create the soul. The human soul will be created. And this is the process. When a person has that, if a person has the solar will, has the human soul incarnated, that's when you call a person a master, yeah, or a bodhisattva. That means a person has actually reconnected. If you look at the, I haven't got a lot of space here, but if you look at like the Kabbalah, for instance, you know, I've often said that we're sort of disconnected, you know, we're sort of living in the lower regions of the Kabbalah, and we're not actually connected to the upper regions of the Kabbalah. You know, we're living just in these, we just live in the bottom four. But when the human soul is created, we actually reconnect that Kabbalah. And suddenly we're reconnected to this whole top part of the Kabbalah. We're suddenly reconnected to the human soul, the human soul, which is here. We're connected to the spiritual soul, which is our being. We're connected to the divine soul, which is our proper consciousness, the Buddhi, the feminine soul. We're connected to the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, and the Divine Mother, all of them. And so we reconnect that whole process, that whole system comes back together with the creation of the human soul. And that's when a person becomes a bodhisattva, meaning that they're no longer controlled by the process of samsara completely. It doesn't mean they've left samsara, but it means that they're no longer controlled. So you're no longer mechanically coming back. You actually have some control. The person, for instance, who's reached that, like for instance, like these guys, like those Tibetan lamas, they are at this level or higher. They've reached this level, meaning that they can control the process of reincarnation. And there's actually something to incarnate. They do we've said that before, that in reincarnation, we don't technically reincarnate, we just sort of come back constantly, unconsciously, whereas they are incarnating because they have a human soul, they have a bodhisattva, and that will then reincarnate that's an incarnation into a body again of the same spiritual force, as opposed to us just sort of mechanically coming back totally asleep. So these initiations, these last three, are the hardest because we have to conquer the difficulties that we have. We have, instead of having the beautiful astral body, we have the demon of desire inside of ourselves. Instead of having the perfected mind, we have the demon of the mind. And instead of having the human soul, we have ill will. And each time we go through these, to finish these initiations, after the fire is awoken and is ready to ascend that last little part, we have to defeat these demons. Each one of these has to be defeated. Each one of these. And so when the astral demon, the desire, changes a lot, often people say that during this process, a person can be almost seem a little bit mad during the process of fighting the demon of desire, because the desire comes on so strongly inside the person. In the mind, I actually remember that process, just not sleeping for 3 straight nights, because the mind was just insane. It just would not stop. Just blah, 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 blah. And you say to yourself, oh, I've had a few nights like this. No. I had a few nights like that before. But this was something else. That mind was just mental. I wanted to throw myself off a building. It was so crazy because I was fighting with this thing, fighting with this mind I was fighting with the mind in its death throes. That demon was in there, really powerful. So once we actually conquer that, for instance, demon of the mind, we gain 60% control of the mind. Right now, we have 3. So right now, you tell yourself, don't think about this, and you're like, instantly think about it. I'm like, don't think about a purple elephant. You're like, purple elephant. Oh, no. Well, once the demon of the mind has been conquered, we have 60% control of the mind, meaning we can control the mind most of the time. Yeah, some thoughts will come in because we're not conscious. We don't actually put the attention. But I'll tell you, once that's done, you want to quiet the mind, you sit down for meditation. It's extremely easy. You can basically force the mind to silence, and it will go to silence very quickly. So this process is really wonderful. Now, when we reach this 5th initiation, this is the most sort of important part of this early stage, And this here is when we decide whether or not we're going to take the direct path or the spiral path. So if you see here, there's like a little door with an angel in the picture. That's what we're talking about. So the direct path is the one here that we've drawn. It's the one that goes over these 3 mountains and finishes up. The spiral path sort of goes off this way, and it will eventually get there, but it's going to be pretty roundabout. It will eventually get back to the absolute, but not the same way, not through. This path can be lived in one lifetime. If a person works really hard on themselves, if they practice the alchemy with diligence, if they die, if they sacrifice for their fellow man, work for their fellow man, pay off their karma, this whole path can be done in one lifetime. But the nirvanic path, which is a different path, is one that is lived doing good deeds. So it's lived a lot more in the sacrifice and less in the death and rebirth. And what it is a person works, they work hard, and then they have time off. So meaning between lives, a person goes to nirvana, or what we often call Christendom heaven, and they spend some time in the electronic worlds, in the higher regions. They spend this time in this, which can happen to us between lifetimes if we do good deeds, even for an uninitiated person. If we do really good karmic deeds, then we go to this nirvanic place in between lives. So how like all religions talk about some sort of heaven. Do you know what I mean? All of them. And that's true. Yeah, if you do good deeds, if you work positively karmically, if you work well for others, you'll acquire a lot of good karma, and you'll get to go into the superior worlds where your ego gets left at the door, and you get to spend some time there and rest, a proper rest, But you will eventually come back. You haven't left samsara because nirvana is actually part of samsara. In fact, if you look at the wheel of samsara, nirvana is on the wheel of samsara. And so it's not off of it. So that's the nirvanic path. And many people choose the nirvanic path who don't want to go through this, because this path is really hard. That's the actual reason. Samael describes it as more bitter than bile. It is extremely difficult, extremely confronting. Now, for people who've already had a really hard life, that's just a no-brainer. If you've had a really rough life, you're like, what's a little bit more rough? Should be right. We'll just go the direct path. It's quicker. Do you know what I mean? But that's the whole point. So the direct path is what starts the process of the Christ inside of us, the cosmic Christos. This part here in the Kabbalah, the second Logos. The Nirvanis do not incarnate the Christ. They do not go through the Christic process. Have you seen the Christic process? Have you watched the Passion of the Christ? Also nicknamed by me, the Bastion of the Christ. Because that's literally what it is. Mel Gibson just beats a poor, defenseless man for like 2 hours, 3 hours straight.
A new one coming out.
But why? He already beat him once. Twice?
Is this what Jesus meant by the last shall be first? The meek and the weak and the maimed shall be first through the gate.
He's talking about working on the eye, yeah.
Well, is he talking about the direct path?
When he talks about heaven is taken by assault, he's talking about the direct path. Do you know what I mean?
What does it mean that the meek shall inherit? In terms of
He means
last shall be first.
Yes.
And
The last to be
talking
first
about
is put
direct
yourself
path being more
last.
difficult?
Sorry?
This direct path being a more difficult
Of
approach,
course.
and it could potentially manifest itself as extreme challenge and suffering
Yes.
in different things within the life.
What's going to happen, I haven't got to the second mountain, but when the second mountain, all your ego comes out from every lifetime and is dissolved. It is an extremely painful process. So what he means when he says the first will be last, last will be first, he's talking about working on the ego, really, and the depths of the eye. If you what he's talking about is sacrifice. You know what I mean? To put yourself last, to work and to die. When he talks about heaven is taken by assault, he's talking about the direct path. Remember, the brave have taken, heaven is taken by assault. He's talking about the fact it's the work, the hard work. The direct path is a conqueror's path. It's the path we take, but that conquering is of ourselves. Do you know what I mean? So when he's saying the meek, he's talking about extreme force applied on oneself.
So
The stick measure yourself.
So how does the alchemy work in that sense?
What do you
Does that
mean?
that both would need to be interested in the direct, or does one
No.
head off on the nirvana and the other one head off on
Samael's wife was a Nirvani.
Oh no, really?
She was a Nirvani, but
So you
they
could be
say
on-
that she reincarnated after that and took the direct path, where she was so inspired by him. But she was a Nirvani. So when she met him, so the Nirvanis, they reincarnate constantly without falling. They don't fornicate. They continuously reincarnate. They'll do like a bit of work and then they'll come back. Do a bit of work, come back. Do a little work, come back, like that. They'll take like 2 lives off and then come back. And so they slowly work on the ego. But you're talking about like where we dissolve all the ego in one lifetime. They might spend one lifetime dissolving like 2 egos. And they just take ages. So Samael's wife was a Nirvani. They had a strong relationship from many lifetimes before. But later on she changed after his passing. And then she decided to go the direct path. And then she reincarnated as a young boy in the later movement and actually continued to work. But no, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not like, again, it's not like you only have to practice the alchemy with the other person. You can still die. You know what I mean? Like, it's still your own process. Do you know? But it's obviously a lot easier if they are, if you understand.
That's what I was asking.
Much easier, as always, if we're on the same page. So once this process happens, once the human soul's created and everything, then the last 2 initiations happen, the 6th and 7th, which are the next parts up like that, which is the spiritual soul and the divine soul come together. And then there is a secret initiation they call initiation of Kritifereth for those who choose the direct path, where the Christ begins to be incarnated. And the Christ takes control of the process and it becomes a radical process. Because now the Christ is going to put you through the paces and push and change. So you're going to have to live the path of the Christ, which means lots of sacrifice, lots of death. You know what I mean? And so then after that, so if you see I've sort of put a half through this mountain here like that. I've done it the same here. Those 7 initiations, the 8th one is like a secret one, so I'll just drop that out. The 7 main initiations, which are for the 7 bodies, yeah? And those bodies of fire, those serpents of fire, are then go through the process on the direct path of becoming bodies of light. They are put to an even higher degree. Yeah, they are moved to an even higher degree. They are refined to the process of the alchemy and the process of the death and the process of the kundalini ascending the spine and the various tests we go through. They become even more refined, and these are often called the Gnostic initiations. Yeah, I don't know if you guys know this, but the Christ is actually heavily related to Venus. The Christ is related to the sun, of course, but a lot of people don't know that he's the morning star. Do you know who the morning star is? Do you know what the morning star is? It's Venus. The morning star is Venus. You know what I mean? And if you look, every single culture puts the Christic deity, like Quetzalcoatl, things like this, their Christic deities, Kukulkan, etc., are all related to the morning star, which is Venus. It's kind of strange, but it's the initiation of deep love. It's the initiation of Venus. The Venusic initiations are where the bodies, through the process of sublimation in the alchemy, go from bodies of fire to bodies of light. Now, I'm going to just glass over, graze. Is it graze over? Glaze? Gloss. Ah. I feel like they're all similar. I'm going to gloss over these last 2 a little bit because this is very far in. And we'll come back to them another day. So let's explain the last. So the 2nd and 3rd mountain. So before we reach the 2nd mountain, in between the 1st and 2nd. So the first was often called the major mysteries. It's all about initiations. We're gaining all these powers, all this force, all this capacity. And in between these two mountains, there's a little pause. It's an alchemical pause too. We have to stop practicing alchemy for a little while. And it can be just some months, I don't know, it depends on the person. And what will happen is, we have to go through the test of serenity and patience in between the two mountains. If a person can be patient, they then move on to the second mountain. Now, the second mountain is all about the death of the ego. The first 9, there's no initiations here. They're all just tests. So the first 9 tests are to do with the labors of Hercules. If you've read the labors of Hercules, the first one is the Nemean lion, then there's the Stymphalian bird, the Hydra of Lerna, the Cyrenian hind, etc. And what they all represent is different dissolving of different elements in the abyss. So in our personal abyss, so if you see the reflection of the Kabbalah, you have the 9 inferior regions, which are the 9 Dantean circles, like that. Each one of them represents cleaning out a different part of our internal abyss. So the first one, we're cleaning out our lunar abyss, which is symbolized by limbo. Then we clean out our mercurial abyss. Then we clean out our Venustic abyss, and then it goes on there. And we clear out all of these different layers and levels, all of this in those 9. So at the end of this process, the ego should be mostly gone, pretty much gone. There's still sort of what they call things like the images of the ego, like the seeds, and then the memories of the ego, which are dissolved later. But pretty much all of the ego is dissolved as we know it at that point. And these processes are like that. Like, for instance, one of the last ones, the 8th labor, is the cleaning of the stables of Augeas, which is where he diverts. There's a stable that has had 500 bulls and 300 cows, I think it is, and he has to clean it in one day, which is clearly very sexual. You know, the water's cleaning through all the filth of the old fornication. That's what it's really about. And so he ends up diverting a river through it. He just moves a river in one day, because Hercules, and he moves a river through the entire of the stables and cleans them out in one day. The same thing like the mares of Diomedes, which are mares that eat human flesh, and he ends up throwing Diomedes to his own mares and then brings them back. And each of them represent different bestial, instinctive and negative aspects, which are obviously the ego, and they are all dissolved in that process, heavily helped and assisted by our internal Christ. Now, after that process is done, we go through a process of what's called the 8 years of job. This is minimum 8 physical years. This particular test must be a minimum of 8 physical years. And what it is it's what's called a qualification period. It's a qualification period. And what that means is, like you study to be a doctor, and you spend 6 years studying to be a doctor, but then you have to then spend a year or two where they just have you there, and you're still not actually technically a qualified doctor. You've done all the study. Now you have to work for a year or two in a practice with another doctor until he'll sign you off and say, yeah, that guy knows what he's doing. You know, not just the intellectual knowledge, he has it. So this qualification shows all the ego has been dissolved. Then you've got 8 years of proving that you're not going to recreate it. Because the mind, remember the fighting the Hydra of Lerna? The Hydra has all the hair. Every time you cut off one of the heads, another one comes back. It's the mental guardian. So what he does, he burns all the stumps, which is alchemical. But the last one he can't burn off is there's like an immortal head. So he places it under a rock, which is the cubical stone, the philosopher's stone. He places it under a rock, and then that's it. And that represents the mind. You can't dissolve the mind. You will always have the mind. And what that means is you will always have the capacity for the ego to be brought back, because the mind will be able to bring the ego back. So you always, like, the whole process of dissolving the ego isn't like, you know, there's like this whole thing where we just want to put our feet up at the end of the universe. You know, like we go through this whole process of working really hard on ourselves and like, all right, we've done that. Back to the absolute. Time to put my feet up. Oh yeah. It's been a hard internal esoteric path. I'm really looking forward to retirement though. When the reality is you will always have to be vigilant with the mind, because the mind will try and drag you back in. And that's just the way it is. So when you finish this whole process, you will always have the mind, meaning you will always be able to fall again. Hopefully, over this process, you've created such capacity, such power, and such knowledge that you won't. It's unlikely, but it can.
Oh, you know the answer to this there. In that last statement.
Very unlikely.
Is there any fun part?
Sorry? Is there any point doing the path?
No, is there a fun part?
Is there a fun part?
Where's-
Oh, the internal experiences are pretty good.
I remember my grandma used to say, what is it? That statement. What is it? About the blessed be the wicked. What's that statement?
Blessed of the meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
No, yeah, something like the concept that only through suffering
Oh my God, yeah.
do you reach anywhere, as opposed to, you know.
Yeah, the obsession with pain. The process is difficult, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not rewarding, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not. There's no joy. It's like I remember.
I like this part. Let's finish on this part.
I remember a Gnostic missionary once had an experience, really powerful experience with the Christ. Really powerful, super powerful. He actually met Jeshua ben Pandera, not your internal Christ, the guy who was the Christ physically, the guy who was Jesus, yeah? And he met that master in the internal worlds, in the astral. And the master said to him, ask for anything and I'll give it to you. And he said, I want to feel the pain of the passion. And he said the pain was so excruciating that he came back to the physical body like screaming and crying. And I like what my dad said to him later. He said, why don't you also ask for the joy? And it was just like, it was that moment when, you know, like,
Would have been granted.
yeah, well, you hear those stories about like those Tibetan lamas who get sent to is it Tunka? I think it's called the practice of Tunka, where they put them in hospital and they're sick, and then they just keep getting sicker, but everyone else on the floor starts getting healthy, and they're just laughing and like dying of leprosy, and everyone's like, what's going on? And what they're actually doing is they're opening up their vital body and actually sucking in everybody else's sickness and taking on everybody else's karma, but they're happy. They're not doing it because they're just like, oh, poor me, man. You know what I mean? Like, what's the guy in Da Vinci Code? You know, it's like they're actually happy. So although the process is difficult, and you know, the reality is there's a lot of joy on the path. Every time you finish initiation, there's joy. The ones I've finished, I feel, there's Samael says your acceptance, the hall of children, you know, that all the masters come to you as small children, full of joy and happiness and accept you, you know. Some of the tests are crazy. There's some full-on tests you go through, the eternal worlds. But then at the end, there's always happiness and joy and celebration. You know what I mean? And going back to the absolute. So wait till I get to the absolute and then I'll explain. So 8 physical years. This particular process is 100% painful though. This is supposed to be. So if you know Job in the Bible, yeah, I'm pretty sure that the word having a job actually comes from this one here. When someone says, I need to go to my job, I'm pretty sure it comes from the word Job. Because Job in the Bible, as you know the story, you know, Jesus, or what, not Jesus, sorry, God says, I've got this beautiful guy who is so perfect and I've given him everything and I'm really happy, he's the best. And the devil says, if he's so great, he only likes you because you've given him everything. Give him to me and I'll show you if he's actually good. And then the test of Job begins. And Job goes through the whole process. He loses his wife. He in the end, he's sitting in the burning remains of his house while he's got 3 guys like speaking in his ears, whispering, you know, like horrible things, which represent these 3 traitors. Yeah. And he's just done, you know, and he does, and not for a second does Job, and he's also got like leprosy or something, you know, he's like dying of a sickness as well. But in the end, Job keeps his faith. And so it's qualification because, you know, you've dissolved all the ego, you got given all this power. But before we get to this next level of, you know, what they call the immortal master, the resurrected Christ, the most powerful, fantastic, you know, the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, we have to prove that we're actually not going to blow it. And we're not going to destroy and, you know, create a whole problem of world history and destroy everything. You give a person all this capacity, you know, they can't, you know, they need to be trusted. And so we have to qualify that. So 8 years. And at the end of that process, I forgot to write it on there, but that's where the resurrection is, the Christ, the resurrection. The last 3 days of the 8 years of Job, we go through the process of the resurrection. The Christ inside of us dies and resurrects. Yep. That can happen. I mean, that's supposed to be why the Christ died physically, because he was actually going through that process physically to show us what that process is internally. You know what I mean? But yeah, there is a sickness. A person can get really sick at the end of this and look like they're going to die even. The 3 final labors, if you've read the 3 final labors, you'll know that they are extremely complicated. Like, where he's got to get like the apples of Hesperides, and to go there, he goes through this whole process of like getting Nereus, and then he goes to see, getting Nereus, and then finding Atlas, and then holding the world, and then tricking Atlas into picking the world up. He goes through this whole process, and the same with the what's it called, the cattle of Geryon, and each of these last three labors are incredibly complicated. He has to go through so much to do each one of them, and what they represent the incarnation of the last three primary forces. So they represent the incarnation of the third Logos, the incarnation of the Father. The Christ has already been incarnated and resurrected here, but resurrected in here. That, just to be clear, the incarnation and resurrection of the Christ is the same as creating the Philosopher's Stone. They're actually the same thing. The Christ, I forgot to mention, this 8 years of Job changes those bodies of light into bodies of gold. So what happens is then the Christ inside with the bodies of gold, the Philosopher's Stone, they're the same thing. So these three final labors represent the last three parts. There's also something up in here in the Iron Soft. There's it's like the first piece of our being that exited the Absolute. These three are incarnated all together. And then the last one, final liberation, to go back to the Absolute. So at the very end, we sort of jump back off and go back into the Absolute. That's what the ascending Christ picture is. It's going back into the Absolute. Now, at this moment, just before we go back, because when you go back to the Absolute, it has to be at the close of the cosmic day, meaning that a person will go and then wait at the doorway of the Absolute. Yeah? Since there's three regions of the Absolute, but I've just drawn one here. But you'll wait just in here at this little spot here, and then when creation goes back into the Absolute, we will go back in with it as a fully self-realized being. In fact, in Gnosis, when we say the self-realization, we're usually just referring to this point here. But a fully self-realized being is one who's finished the whole path. So we wait here. But at this moment, as being a Paramatha Satya, or one who's completed the major missions, the great work in the third mountain, we may feel inside of ourselves, and we're now one with the being. So our being and us together, yeah, all of the power and capacity and everything that we've transformed now goes back into the being. We're now one with the being, yeah? May look back down to humanity and feel compassion. And so we may come back as a great guide of humanity. And these are the great masters who live in secret. You hear about them now and again. Cagliostro, Saint Germain, Babaji, Mataji, Jeshio Bempendira. He didn't go back, he's still around. You know, they're the great masters who still live and move humanity and work for humanity subtly. Moving circumstances, changing things, we don't know, you know. And we may want to come back to do that, to help humanity, to continue. We be completely self-realized, but staying to work. Now the problem with that, what's the problem? Well, if you're in creation, you can always fall. So you have to be careful. You know, a fully self-realized being can come back into creation to help people and then maybe get a bit carried away and fall back into creation. Like that, like the famous Count Zanoni. Samael talks about him in his books one minute. Samael talks about in his books all the time. He says the great Count Zanoni, who was a fantastic immortal master who fell in love with a dancing girl in Naples. Whoops. And lost all his initiations, and now he's a miserable slug of the earth. And the best thing is I remember reading someone saying that Zanoni was reincarnated in his group. So every time he was having a go at Zanoni, the guy was sitting there, which I think is funny. Yeah, what were you going to say?
Okay, just back to the fidelity to our partner.
Yes.
You said once it's done, once they shake each other, it's done. There's no.
What do you mean? Sorry. What's?
You say it's done, like you go back to the whole process again. If you're not.
I mean that because when we fornicate, when we're losing our sexual fluids like that, this process is done. Do you know what I mean? Remember I was talking about the alchemy, how we have to retain our sexual fluid and transmute it? This process doesn't happen when we're not transmuting, you know?
My question is just like, if that happened to someone,
yes,
in that relationship where they do the alchemy,
yes,
it's like there isn't forgiveness.
Yes.
Still can going on, like if someone forgive you, or
I honestly, to be honest, most of the situations I've heard, like, you know, because Gnostic gossip, most of the situations I've heard, I've been in Gnosis a long time, most of them, they've stayed together. Do you know what I mean? Like after that process. But it slowed everything down. So for instance, as an example, I think I didn't mention this in the alchemy talk, but Samael says that when we have a sexual failure, like we lose it, we reach the orgasm like that, right? Let's say, for instance, you're practicing the alchemy. Yeah, you're practicing the alchemy. You're on this esoteric path. This path here, I probably was a bit harsh saying that if you lose here, that you go back to the beginning of the probationary. It's just the probationary, so probably not. But if you're here and you fail that, then yes, you're going to go right back down to here again. Do you know what I mean? So it's a little more correct because this starts with sex. So if you make sexual mistakes, you're going to fall here. Do you understand what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's probably a little more clear there. But Samael says that if you're practicing the alchemy and you lose the sexual energy, like you're practicing and maybe often with the man, because men, right, make a bit of a mistake and you go too far, you lose the sexual energy. He says that the Kundalini will descend. Yeah, so the Kundalini is the marker for the movement of the initiation. As it moves up, and when it reaches the top, you go to the next initiation. So you finish the first initiation when that Kundalini has raised all the way up to here. Yeah? If you have a sexual failure, then it will drop depending on the degree of the failure. Yeah? So for instance, I have made that mistake before and I felt it. I felt an immense pain in my spine for like 2 days and I felt something kind of falling like that. And it was just like back pain from hell for a few days, but it was that was like a little accident. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't taking care of my senses a little bit. I made a lustful mistake. You know what I mean? But if you're there in an alchemical relationship and then you're tested, it's more serious, and then you go off with another person and then fornicate, you're going to lose the lot. You could be up here, you know what I mean? But you're going to go straight back to the beginning here. Do you see what I mean? It doesn't mean necessarily that people will finish the relationship. They may then continue practicing, but it's going to be hard. And Samael says that if you to regain what you've lost is very hard. And I will say that to myself, my own testimony, that when I went through that process and I lost it and then I had to regain, I felt it was much harder. Like the practice of the alchemy was really difficult for quite a while after that. Like I felt just hard, it was very hard to move it. Like when you were doing the ERO and breathing, it was hard. It just felt like it wasn't moving, because I can feel it moving through the body. I couldn't feel it. It was like, it's like I'm trying to, before it was like a nice flow, like it's in some air's just moving nicely. And then it was like I was trying to lift lead. Just like, oh man. And it was like that for like weeks afterwards, because of that fall was pretty bad. Do you know what I mean? But if you do it bad, you can lose whole initiations like that. You have a pretty bad fall, but it's not a complete fall, then you could lose like a whole initiation. You have to go back one. Then you got to fight to get it back. It's pretty hard. Yeah. Whether or not the couple stays together, that depends on the couple. Do you know what I mean? Depends on how much pain and suffering they feel for that process. That's.
Would it be that fall part of the test for the partner? Would it be like one of these fall part of the test for the partner as well?
Oh, that's interesting. You mean like for the person who's not?
Yeah.
That's an interesting. It wouldn't be part of that test, but it would be obviously very difficult for them. It could be a test for them as well, to forgive a person, or that'd be a very difficult process, you know what I mean? Especially in our world now, we're not really keen on forgiveness anymore. Now everyone's like, dump his ass. You know what I mean? There's no forgiveness anymore. We don't want to forgive each other. We talk about forgiveness, but then everyone's like watching revenge movies and, it's like, make them suffer. It's like, there's a less now of like, someone made a mistake, we should help them, in that way, in the relationship. Now it's like, they're toxic, get rid of them. Okay. It's complicated, Answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so the last point, then we can do a nice practice. Jeez Louise. So, the last point. The most important point on the path, right? When Samael was doing this and he was writing in the Perfect Matrimony or in the book The Three Mountains, you know what I mean? Which is where this is, I don't have the Perfect Matrimony right now, but in the book The Three Mountains, when Samael talks a lot about this process of the Esoteric Path, when he's writing about that, you'll hear him say, awakening the Kundalini is the most important thing. It's the most important thing. The most important thing ever. And then, like, 3 books later, he's like, the most important thing ever is the 5th initiation. Everything else, and he's like, the Kundalini is kindergarten. It's just baby's work. It's not even real. You haven't got anywhere. And then later on, he says, the real path begins in the second mountain. He says, all those bodhisattvas feel like they're getting somewhere, but they haven't even reached the second mountain yet. So they have no idea what they're doing. You know what I mean? And then later on, he's all like, he goes, once you go back to the absolute, that's when the real work begins. Do you know? And you say to yourself, come on, like, this is a contradiction. You know what? For some, and I understand what he means. Where you are on the path now is the most important thing. If you're waiting for if you're looking for the partner in Awaken the Fight, that's the most important thing. Yeah? If you're practicing the alchemy and you're waiting for Awaken the Fight, that's the most important thing. If we're waiting for the Guardian Threshold, that's the most important thing. Do you know what I mean? God, I can't wait to pass the Guardian. Wouldn't that be great? You know? And the same thing, when I've reached this point here, I'm going through the process. If I say, for instance, I'm about to do this, because this I didn't talk much about the internal experiences, but like a lot of these internal experiences are quite intense. Like one of them here, a person's going to try and kill you, and you have to take that. And I saw one that was like one person, when they went through this, their being was standing on the other side of a chasm, kind of like in Indiana Jones, and they had to just step out, and the being was just standing there like this. And like he had to just keep eye contact and just walk straight into the air, you know what I mean? And like he had to be ready to die for the being. That's what the test is. And he said when he stepped out, it was like Indiana Jones. It was like a invisible thing. But he didn't know. He just had to make the step. And he failed that test twice. He failed it twice internally because he couldn't do it. So yeah, as I said, you may be here just before the 5th initiation. Well, that's what's the most important thing for you. And then once you've done that, then the most important thing is the incarnation of Christ. Then it's the labors of Hercules. It's the, I forgot to write there, but it's the resurrection of the Christ. Or if we're just before the end, it's the final liberation. It's always the next thing. So, ask. Ask your being. Tell me where I am on the path. You have an experience to show you. You might be right at the beginning, or you might be just here, waiting here, or in here somewhere. Ask. Find out. Comment below. Ask your being and comment below. Like and subscribe. Hit that little bell button.